Saludos desde la vanguardia. Nuevamente estamos aquí para presentarles la 21ª conferencia de nuestro ciclo de sostenibilidad, que hoy le hemos titulado Soluciones climáticas para la salud. Este ya es el quinto año en el que profundizamos en iniciativas del activismo medioambiental para revertir la crisis climática. Y en esta edición queremos dar la voz a Jonathan Patz, que es director e investigador principal en Climate Solutions for Health. Desde el Laboratorio de Soluciones Climáticas para la Salud, trabaja para mejorar la salud humana y al mismo tiempo resolver la crisis climática. Proporciona ciencia que impulse cambios políticos significativos y construya también un futuro durante toda la vida que se beneficie nuestro planeta. Jonathan Patz es profesor de la Universidad de Wisconsin-Madison, catedrático en salud y medio ambiente, y es fundador del Global Health Institute en esa universidad. Es doctor en medicina y ha dedicado su carrera a investigar cómo interactúan el cambio climático, la salud humana y la salud de los ecosistemas. Gracias a esta dedicación, el doctor Patz fue elegido miembro de la Academia Nacional de Medicina y compartió el Premio Nobel de la Paz en el 2007 como autor del Grupo Intergubernamental de Expertos sobre el Cambio Climático. El doctor ve en la mitigación del cambio climático la mayor oportunidad para la salud en nuestro tiempo. Doctor Jonathan Patz, muchas gracias por estar hoy con nosotros en La Vanguardia y compartir este rato, esperemos, muy interesante para nuestros seguidores, nuestros usuarios de nuestro diario.
Well, thank you very much. When we think about these physical attributes of climate change and the many pathways through which they affect our health, be it directly from urban heat waves, air pollution, infectious diseases, water resources and food supply, and of course, mental health and forced migration, environmental refugees. And we've known for a long time many of these climate-sensitive diseases over here on the right column. And recently, I was part of a systematic review that looked at the pathways through which human diseases are affected by extreme climate. Over on the left, you see warming, precipitation, floods, droughts, storms. And these are these pathways through which climate affects our health and the many, many diseases. And in fact, we found more than 1,000 pathways through which extreme weather events aggravate human pathogens. Most of them infectious diseases, but not all infectious diseases. One other aspect, before I get into the good news story, is that those first impacted, those first and worst impacted are disadvantaged populations. And here you can see this is a green vegetation map of a city in Virginia, the city of Richmond, Virginia. And the green by satellite shows you where all the trees are. And the red areas are showing something that we call red-lined areas, where 50 years ago, if you were Black, African-American, you were not allowed to buy a house outside of these zones, red-lined areas. And so now when you look at the heat map, where the green trees were, it's not so hot. But these formerly red line areas where African Americans were forced to buy houses, they're the hottest during an urban heat island event. So there's an equity story. So I want to dive into the entire story of climate change in one slide here. We know burning fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases that are heating up the planet. And that slide I showed you before, all these health impacts, the many ways that climate affects our health. It's why I've dedicated my career to this challenge. So we need to intervene. We need to reduce the risk of exposures, but also we need to go upstream and get to the root of the problem. So we need intervention to reduce greenhouse gas emissions energy, transportation, agricultural policy that reduce greenhouse gas emissions that are heating the planet. But also, we already have climate change. We have extreme storms, droughts, disasters happening. So we need to build resilience. So we need to intervene at both levels, and we need to educate, inform the public and policymakers, and build a climate justice movement and motivation for action. The second edition of our book that came out last year takes a look at this two-pronged issue where you see the risks at the top, this image, and the benefits at the bottom. And my talk, I want to be focusing on the opportunity here. And so I'm mostly going to now focus on why actions to mitigate climate change offer enormous health benefits. And that combating climate change could be free or even beneficial if you take the public health view. And I've been publishing about these opportunities for the last 10 years. In short, the larger the crisis, the greater the opportunity. And it's why I've shifted away from measuring the risks from climate change to looking at the opportunities and how climate solutions are beneficial for health. The Pathfinder Initiative, which is a Wellcome Trust sponsored project led by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, takes a look at all of these different sectors, electricity, food systems, buildings, transportation, showing that across these sectors, getting to a low carbon economy, reducing burning fossil fuels, can improve air quality, improve our diets, improve physical fitness, and reduce lots of diseases because of that. Just a couple of examples. Over 8 million people die prematurely from air pollution every year. And according to this recent study from a year and a half ago, more than 60% of those deaths are directly attributed to burning coal, oil, and gas. So over 5 million premature deaths from burning fossil fuels. The food sector. Many of us following a Western diet eat way too much red meat. And if the world was to follow the universal healthy reference diet, pretty much the Mediterranean diet with much more plant-forward food, very little red meat, more fish, but less red meat, that could prevent 11 million premature deaths every year. And finally, transportation. If we were to get out of the private motorized vehicle and have safe alternative transportation, more transit and walking, and also biking, that saves another few million lives every year. So, just these three sectors, getting away from fossil fuels, offers enormous health benefits. My lab has been trying to quantify this for the United States. We looked at the question of if you could get away from fossil fuels across various sectors in the United States, what would the benefit be from the improvement of air quality? And the headlines in the Washington Post from our study showed that cutting air pollution from burning fossil fuels would save over 50,000 American lives every year. And this map just shows the darker the blue, the better the benefit. And that we have lots of coal-fired power plants in the Ohio River Valley. So that's why this area benefits a lot to get off of coal. But we have lots of cars in California. We have petroleum processing in Louisiana. So lots of areas for improvement from air quality if we were to get off of fossil fuels. Now, skeptics will argue, they say, well, coal and oil are cheap, renewables are expensive. That's a false argument. That's not true anymore. According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, 6 years ago, for the first time ever, if you removed all subsidies for any kind of fuel for electricity, renewables and batteries are now the cheapest to generate electricity. So, this plummeting drop in the price of renewables is something to cheer about, and not be not pretend that fossil fuels are cheaper anymore, because they are not. There's no excuse to get over to fossil fuels. To get away from fossil fuels, to transition away from fossil fuels. We looked at bicycle commuting as something that, if we could have more biking instead of driving cars, what that would mean for health, from the promotion of physical fitness. In the United States, less than 1% of people bicycle to work. In our city of Madison, we're lucky. We have much higher rates of biking. And if the country adopted our level of biking to work, that would save 20,000 lives every year. If we got to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, well, they do a lot of biking. That would save over 60,000 lives every year. So, it sort of begs the question, isn't it time that we design cities for people instead of for cars? And we're making great gains with the e-bikes. And so this is something already slashing demand for oil and improving physical fitness and air quality. But it's got to be done safely. We need cities where you're not in that position with buses and cars that could put you at risk. I'll show you at the end a slide from Copenhagen that shows why design is important. And finally, mental health aspects of getting away from fossil fuels and conserving green space is important. Green space reduces urban heat islands, as far as exacerbating the urban heat island effect. If you have green space, that reduces the risk. But look at this study from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that showed the inverse relationship of the risk of developing a mental disorder anytime in your lifespan compared to the amount of green space that you grow up as a child. So even if you're out in the countryside, a small provincial town, even the suburbs of the capital or in the capital, the higher the level of green space that you encounter growing up, the less likelihood that you'll develop a psychiatric disorder during your lifetime. So there's a mental health benefit. So finally, just a quick example, looking at Copenhagen from 1960s, lots of cars, but this is what Copenhagen looks like now. So, that was not by accident. It was there, dominated by cars, and now you've got a walking mall. And so the vision and intentional design is key, because such change doesn't happen by accident. And I'll end by just wrapping up to say that we need to communicate the climate change health issue much better. Simple messages repeated often by trusted messengers. Climate change, it's real, it's happening. We are causing it, it's us, because we're burning fossil fuels. The scientists agree that, climate scientists that are studying this problem, most of them, 99% of them, agree. We know the risk, so it's bad, but there's hope. So those 10 words can sort of wrap this up. And also the trusted messengers, many of them are in the medical community. And so there are movements across the world organizing nurses and doctors that are the most trusted messengers. And even the National Academy of Medicine in the United States is taking on climate change and putting a high priority grand challenge on climate change and human health for all, and a roadmap for transformative action to achieve health for all at net zero emissions. So solving the climate crisis and improving health at the same time. So I'll just say that the health benefits narrative is beginning to reach decision makers and the public, but more communications are needed, showing why solving climate change is a golden opportunity for our health. And with that, I thank you for the opportunity to give this message, and I will stop sharing my screen and take questions from you, Enrique.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, doctor. Empezaré por ahí, por el último slide, en el que explica que intentan convencer a los que deciden las políticas justamente para que sean conscientes de esta fotografía de la situación que tenemos. La pregunta concreta es, ¿y escuchan estos ámbitos de decisión, estos gobiernos que son de países principales emisores de CO2 o causantes principales de la crisis climática? ¿Escuchan y están atentos y, sobre todo, están cambiando hacia un modelo de mayor sostenibilidad?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I'll speak generally first, which is that I think that the health message there's more common ground, especially in our polarized political state right now. I think that in many cases, people respond to environmental action, and they are divided more on environmental actions. But when you talk about the health of your children and grandchildren and your own health, I think there's much more common ground where policymakers can more easily come together and say, yeah, well, if we're talking about my health rather than maybe saving the polar bears, I think that gets more agreement and people coming together to discuss health. So I think that helps. And the other thing is that the positive message, the idea that climate change is a crisis and it's serious. Well, if it's so serious and if it becomes hopeless, that paralyzes people. And they say, well, what's the point? There's nothing I can do. It's over. Game is over. Let's just keep doing what we're doing and not just because there's nothing we can do. So I think it's extremely important to show that there are solutions. I think it's more challenging to be optimistic because you have to think harder and think about solutions comparing, just giving up. So it challenges people. But if you can give agency and recognize that there are things that people can do, then, and have a positive message and realize this can be solved, I think it helps. Now, I'll just say briefly, because I don't want to dive into the current situation too much, because we're seeing tremendous retrenchment going backwards from our latest election in the United States. Climate change is ignored and denied. Even public health, public health is something that is being challenged too. So we're in a very problematic time right now. But I still think if you were to go to the common person and ask them, who do they trust, the politician or their doctor, they'll say their doctor. And again, it's why I view so strongly that the health narrative is critical as we center dialogue around climate change. It is about our health. And the more we make sure that people understand this pivotal link between climate change and human health, I think that decision making will be improved for the better.
Es muy interesante esto que dice, porque justamente mi pregunta iba hacia ahí, ¿no? Porque estamos escuchando mensajes negacionistas sobre cuestiones que son una evidencia científica, como es la propia crisis climática y su impacto en la salud. Pero en cambio hay interlocutores oficiales en materia políticos en materia de salud. En Estados Unidos tienen un caso con el secretario de Salud, Kennedy, que incluso está diciendo que el autismo no tiene una base, digamos, infecciosa, para entendernos, ¿no? Y claro, ante estos mensajes que emiten desde la parte oficial de algún gobierno, es muy preocupante. Pero yo iría un poco más allá, porque estos gobiernos llegan porque alguien les ha votado. Estas personas que acaban creyéndose este mensaje negacionista, ¿por qué han entrado en ese camino de descrédito? ¿Qué hemos hecho mal para que esta gente no crea mensajes como el que acaba de hacer doctor y lo que estamos haciendo en este ciclo de conferencias durante 5 años? No se crean este mensaje y, en cambio, atiendan a este otro que es absolutamente, en muchos casos, delirante o absurdo.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. That's the question of the day. And I have two answers to that. The first answer is that we are in a sea of disinformation with all of the, the online media. And a colleague of mine, John Cook in Australia, he points out that we need to call out the disinformation. He has an acronym, FLICC, FLIC, and that stands for, F is for fake experts, L is for logical fallacies, I is for impossible expectations, C is for cherry picking, just picking out a couple of studies, and the other C is for conspiracy theory. And so he says that we really need to, when you're talking to climate deniers, if you're talking to a real climate denier, you're not going to get anywhere. So forget that. But if you're talking to someone that is, their mind is not made up, 70% of Americans are either concerned or alarmed about climate change. So we do need to keep talking about it. So if you're talking to someone who's concerned or on the fence, and it's not a climate denier who will never listen to you anyway, but if you're talking to this majority of people that may respond, ask them where their information is coming from. And, you can point out, well, that's not actually a climate scientist, or that's a logical fallacy. That's not true, or impossible expectations. When do you make a decision ever when you have 100% of certainty? You never do that, right? So calling out the intentional disinformation and getting people more media literate as they deal with disinformation. In my classes, I teach the 11th commandment, thou shalt know thy source. So that's my first answer. The second one is that we have experience with dealing with this disinformation in public health. How many decades did the tobacco industry know that their product was harming people? And how many decades did they pay for intentional disinformation, misinformation? And eventually, we were able to hold tobacco accountable for the damages that they did. And so there are billions of dollars through a settlement for tobacco companies to pay for the damages and the lung cancer they've caused. Well, the fossil fuel industry has taken up the tobacco playbook. They knew that back in the 1950s and 60s, there is evidence that the fossil fuel industry, Exxon, Chevron, these big companies, they knew the climate impact of burning fossil fuels. They also funded campaigns of disinformation. And so, just like tobacco, it's time that we hold fossil fuel companies responsible for the damages. And there is new science on climate attribution. There was something published just last month on climate attribution, to be able to say, those fires in Los Angeles were so extreme. There was a human, fossil fuel induced influence. There are studies that show the impact of man-made climate disruption from burning oil, coal, and gas to our current weather conditions. So in the United States, there are 2 states right now that have climate change Superfund bills that have been passed. This is the state of Vermont and the state of New York, to hold oil companies responsible for the damages. And this is under discussion in the state of California right now. So these are really important developments. And I think it's the next phase of trying to get to the root of the problem, reducing fossil fuel emissions. As far as dealing with our current administration, that is a big challenge. They're fighting against those because fossil fuel industry put a lot of money into this latest election. And so, battling those vested interests is a problem, and it's a challenge, but we need to step up to that challenge.
Pues entonces hablemos un poco de evidencia y intentemos ayudar a nuestros espectadores a entenderlo. Hasta ahora lo que hemos demostrado, o lo que queda demostrado científicamente, es que la emisión de CO2 o la combustión de combustible fósil mata a personas. Pero empezamos a tener alguna evidencia en algún país o en alguna ciudad donde esté más avanzada la descarbonización y, por ejemplo, la electrificación del tráfico. En China hay algunos ejemplos, en Europa también, donde algún estudio donde se pueda decir, a partir de quitar los coches de combustión fósil y poner los eléctricos, por ejemplo, hemos reducido en tal barrio o en tal ciudad o en tal condado, hemos reducido la mortalidad por causa de esta polución. ¿Empezamos a tener datos de esto?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this, I would point you to the Pathfinder initiative, where they have inventoried many climate solutions that have health relevance. And there are not a lot of these that have already shown outcomes. It's sort of too early to tell in many cases, but certainly there are specific local initiatives. For example, implementing bike paths and separating modes of travel to make it safer to bicycle in a city, that you see an increase in the usage. And we know the extremely beneficial effects of exercise on health. There are epidemiological studies that show the benefit of biking over time. For example, the reduction of cardiovascular risk, cancer risk, mental health improvement. So there are many of these types of studies that show reduction in risk. But as far as showing, case by case, here we reduced emissions from coal-fired power plant, and down the road many years later we see an improvement. Those are hard to come by because it takes a long time for health outcomes to occur. But we do see reductions in acute exposure, for example, reduction in asthma rates as air quality improves. And this is one where we actually should invest more in looking at these studies. But I again would point anyone interested in this to the Pathfinder initiative out of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine to get more detail than I'm giving you.
Y profundizando en este asunto, efectivamente con la elevación de la temperatura global, estamos, sobre todo en las zonas del planeta, como en Europa o en Estados Unidos, en el norte de Estados Unidos, estamos descubriendo enfermedades que eran desconocidas o que solo la veíamos en la televisión y que afectaban a ámbitos tropicales, pero que por culpa de este aumento de la temperatura nos están llegando este tipo de infecciones que eran más propias del trópico. Ahí también estamos viendo una evidencia de que podemos sufrir este tipo de infecciones o de contaminación a partir no sé, de algún mosquito que en latitudes más frías no vivía y que ahora puede sobrevivir.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the slide that I showed of more than 1,000 pathways through which extreme climate affects health, there's plenty of evidence that especially vector-borne diseases, mosquito-borne diseases, and diseases that involve rodents. But think about mosquitoes, they are cold-blooded, and that means that their body temperature is the same as air temperature. And if that mosquito is carrying a chikungunya virus or dengue fever virus or a malaria parasite, whatever the air temperature is, that's the body temperature, and those pathogens develop more quickly in warmer temperatures. And there's plenty of evidence of changes in vector-borne diseases linked to climate. There are also other aspects that we need to worry about, certainly agriculture, more droughts, flooding, and of course heat waves. We certainly know that people die in heat waves, extreme heat. So that is something well documented. But as far as infectious diseases, I'd look to chikungunya, the mosquito-borne disease moving northward in Europe, and also Lyme disease in Scandinavia has a broader transmission period where the period of transmission of Lyme disease, for example, in Norway, has a longer season. One other thing, speaking of seasons, allergies. Allergy seasons in the United States, ragweed pollen, which causes hay fever and asthma, the season is lengthened as temperatures have warmed up. So many studies show temperature sensitivity to all sorts of human diseases.
Ahora le voy a introducir otro asunto que es, también lo explicaba usted en uno de sus slides, sobre cómo la urbanización, la configuración de las ciudades, cuanto más verde y menos intenso sea el tráfico, mejora la salud. Pero eso me lleva a la pregunta que le quisiera hacer, porque aquí hay un debate entre si hay que concentrarse en las ciudades o debería también la población extenderse en zonas más rurales. Es decir, lo rural versus lo urbanita, ¿no? Y aquí, en Europa especialmente, también existe este debate. Pero claro, si las ciudades, por ser menos amigables en el sentido de la salud, comporta que su población se extienda en zonas rurales, eso conlleva también la necesidad de habilitar un sistema de transporte para que desde la base rural puedan ir a las ciudades a trabajar. ¿Cómo ve este asunto? Si considera que es un reto o no hay que abandonar las ciudades y en cualquier caso lo que hay que hacer es reformarlas.
Well, that's a big question. Certainly, the world is urbanizing. The trends in urban growth are happening all over the world, and I don't think you're going to reverse that. But I don't think that's a bad thing because, as people are more concentrated, there are more services that can be provided. But how we grow matters. And if I compare two cities, one city being Barcelona, Spain, and the other being Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States, those cities have the same human population or similar population. But the footprint of Barcelona as a compact city with great transit, public transportation, allows that number of people to live in a condensed area much more sustainably versus Atlanta, Georgia, that has the same number of people, but sprawls out, I think, 8 or 9 times the size of its footprint, with highways and the need for cars to get around. So I think that compact cities are a good idea, but this also means there's a difference between servicing a lot of people in a compact area and overcrowding. That's something that takes a lot of planning. But this is where there's more demand from older people, the baby boomer generation, and younger people, to get away from automobile dependency. People like to be able to walk to the shops. This movement towards the 15-minute city where you can get anywhere in 15 minutes is really taking hold. The mayor from Paris, the outgoing mayor of Paris, has made a big push to improve bikeability in Paris. And I think there's public demand for, to have safe alternative travel. So this is where I would not fight the trend of urbanization. I would embrace the trend of people moving into cities, but to design cities that are sustainable. And new cities, of course, will be easier. Retrofitting older cities will be more difficult, but as we've learned from cities like Paris and Barcelona, there are some great opportunities there.
Hablamos de movilidad, también le quisiera preguntar sobre la electrificación del parque móvil privado. Y aquí también existe un debate, porque si es verdad que por la vía de la electrificación pues acabamos con el combustible fósil, pero luego se crean nuevos problemas, sobre todo en relación a los residuos, porque esos coches eléctricos necesitan baterías y esas baterías primero salen de minerales que tenemos que explotar en lugares remotos y, por otra parte, cuando ya dejan de ser útiles, esas baterías acaban siendo un residuo. ¿Qué opinión tiene sobre este asunto?
Yeah, another great question. Whatever we do as far as technology, we need to do a full life cycle assessment. From cradle to grave, or people say cradle to cradle, full life cycle of any technology. It used to be in the United States, when electricity was more powered by coal, that to have an electric vehicle, it was not necessarily more sustainable depending on where you lived. But more and more, we're getting away from coal and having cleaner sources of electricity, so that now anywhere in the United States, anyway, it is more sustainable to have an electric vehicle. Now, your question about what do you do with the waste products and the mining for the electricity, if it comes from solar panels or from wind, or the precious metals for the batteries, that is an important area. It's beyond my expertise, but I'll just tell you that when I talk to electrical engineers, they say that the batteries are the weak link, but we are improving rapidly on battery technology. We do need to figure out best ways of dealing with the waste and recycling. I know that recycling of solar panels is getting better and better. But we need to go into these solutions with eyes wide open, as you point out, and look at trade-offs. Right now, electrification has great opportunities, but we need to look at all aspects and not pretend that there's a silver bullet that if only we did it this one way, that would solve all of our problems. Electrification has some great benefits, especially reducing air pollution if the electricity comes from clean sources. And but we need to do full life cycle assessment. I'll just point out very quickly an add-on. When we think about adapting to climate change, especially heat waves, we need to think about air conditioning and the sources of the electricity for running those air conditioners. And we actually did a study that showed in the United States during heat waves in decades from now, and then in 2050, if we had the same electricity source with lots of coal, you would have we'd have 1,000 more deaths from air pollution by turning on air conditioners and the electricity demand. So this is where we need to be thinking about that, and we need to be thinking about the unintended consequences as we adapt to climate change. And the ideal situation is to decarbonize our electricity system so that when you turn on an air conditioner, but more ideally a heat pump, which is more efficient than an air conditioner, that you don't have a trade-off of burning more fossil fuels to generate that electricity. So again, great question, and full life cycle assessment. I think at the moment we are learning that electrifying our systems really is beneficial, but we can't pretend that there's no side effects from the way we generate that electricity.
En Europa estamos inmersos en un debate en relación a qué energía utilizamos. Las renovables están en pleno apogeo, pero el debate está en el asunto de las nucleares. Incluso recientemente la Unión Europea decidió incorporar las nucleares como energía limpia. ¿A usted qué le parece? Porque hay dos líneas de opinión. Una es que se deben mantener la energía nuclear y la otra que no, que debería desaparecer junto con la fósil.
Yes, I've been asked that question before, and the first thing I'll say about nuclear energy is that I am not the expert because I'm a health scientist, environmental health scientist, but I will tell you what my colleagues say that are nuclear engineers. Is that nuclear is not what it used to be. Nuclear is much safer than it used to be. I worry about two things with nuclear. I worry about potential nuclear proliferation and to make sure that nuclear materials don't get into the wrong hands. The other concern I have with nuclear is the opportunity cost, because it's so expensive that could slow down other research for safe renewable energy. I would not want to see that happen. On the other hand, my nuclear engineer colleagues tell me that, we're not going to see Chernobyl again. The nuclear of today is much safer. I know that Bill Gates is promoting sort of small nuclear modules that if you can get a very safe design of a small nuclear facility and then replicate it and make it much easier to control and have, so I think that nuclear should be on the table. I worry about opportunity costs, and I wouldn't want to just go straight to nuclear. But I think that we need to reconsider nuclear. The human health costs directly of accidental release is probably more. Actually, I know that it is more in the public perception of the dangers of nuclear accidents. Compared to coal mining and other forms of energy, nuclear is actually safer. So I think we have to revisit nuclear. But as far as being pro or con, I'm sort of on the fence with nuclear energy. I will say one thing that I have concerns about, which is a little bit different, which is carbon sequestration. When we're investing, and especially our new administration wants to invest more in, putting the carbon into the ground, which for me as a public health scientist would be a missed opportunity, because if you sequester the carbon without also reducing air pollution from the fine particulate pollution, the sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, all those nasty pollutants that harm people, if you only are trying to reduce the carbon emissions and let fossil fuel companies keep burning fossil fuel and then capture the carbon, to me, that's a missed opportunity that could be, promoting continued use of fossil fuels that will be, cause more illness as we're trying to solve the climate crisis in a non-comprehensive way.
Estamos acabando, pero tengo dos últimas preguntas que hacerle. Una, a toda la gente que nos está viendo y le está escuchando, porque estamos hablando de soluciones macro, pero a nivel familiar, a nivel doméstico, ¿qué podemos hacer nosotros para mejorar nuestra posición al respecto de la crisis climática desde un punto de vista de nuestra salud?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that the individual can do. The first thing, and I'm going to channel the environmentalist Bill McKibben, he says that the first thing an individual can do is be less of an individual. To join your voice, you'll have more agency and have more power if you join together, like the youth have joined for Fridays, the school, the Fridays for the Future, and for example, and the Sunrise Movement. But there are other movements, and I know that there's the Medical Society Consortium on Climate and Health. Doctors and nurses are coming together. So join other groups so your voice gets louder, number one. Number two is, individually, just the examples I showed from electricity to food to transportation, lead by example. If you're able to walk and bike to work, take transit, show your children that, you don't need to jump in a car and go everywhere. So how we change our transportation, how we change our food habits, that's very hard to change. But, we don't all have to become vegetarian, but we can reduce our meat consumption. We can change our diet somewhat. And then we, regarding electricity, we can, in our households, we can actually, in the United States, demand that the utility companies provide us electricity that comes from renewable energy. We have an option to do that. A while ago, it cost more, but now it costs less and less. So you can ask your utility that you want your electricity to come from renewable sources, eat less meat, less red meat, and have alternative transportation that does not involve a gasoline vehicle. I mean, those are things that individuals can do. And one last thing is to not pretend that it's all of the individual's responsibility, because industry will continue to take government subsidies and burn more oil and coal and tell the population, you need to be greener. It's your fault. You need to be more responsible. So you need to communicate to your local officials that, okay, I'm doing my part, but we need at the city level, the regional level, and the federal level, we need real policies for sustainability that will be good for the planet and for our health. So act as individuals, but also demand responsibility and accountability at higher levels.
Y ahora la última, estamos hablando justamente de ciudades, de cómo deberían ser esas ciudades, de su propia observación y de la investigación que ustedes llevan a cabo. ¿Podríamos poner algún ejemplo como la ciudad que lo está haciendo bien o la región en el mundo que lo está haciendo bien está en la buena línea? ¿Tiene alguna ciudad o algún lugar que diga, pues como estos deberíamos ser en el futuro?
Sure. I think Curitiba, Brazil, Bogota, Brazil, these are places, Bogota, Colombia, sorry. These are places that have embraced better transit. I know they have something called the Transmillennia, which is a bus rapid transit, BRT system. It's expensive to build subways, but if you don't have a subway, you can take a lane from the highway and have bus rapid transit where it's much more efficient to get around. China is doing this majorly. They have BRT all over the place. And China is also interesting that they're still burning a lot of coal, but they're investing majorly in solar and electrifying their transportation. I think throughout other parts of Asia, electrification of transportation is happening. So I think there are definitely leaders around the world that are moving that direction. So and then New Zealand, I think there's some bike programs in New Zealand. Certainly Copenhagen and Paris are examples for bikeability, and Holland was already there. The Netherlands was already there. So I think that's where we can take some lessons learned from these developments, and hopefully we can recognize that we can be greener and healthier at the same time, and that getting away from fossil fuels is not necessarily a hard thing. And in many ways, it's beneficial, and it's a way forward that would be no regrets to get to transition away from fossil fuels.
Pues doctor, ha sido un placer. Muchas gracias por compartir su conocimiento y sobre todo por hacer esta pedagogía positiva al respecto de lo que nos está pasando y sobre todo aportar soluciones que son prácticas para que entre todos tengamos un planeta mejor, pero sobre todo mejoremos nuestra salud al respecto. Muchas gracias y mucha suerte con su investigación.
Thank you very much, Enrique.